The morning of October 3, 1437, broke thin and brittle over the village of Bracken Vale, a frost-glazed smear on the edge of the Blackwood, where roofs leaned into one another as if sharing secrets against the cold. Elira Northwood woke to the sound of her mother's whisper counting coins that didn't yet exist, the hush of numbers braided with prayer. A grey light seeped through the shutters, the kind of light that made everything appear already over. She lay very still on her narrow pallet, and followed the cadence of that whisper, the way a child follows a lantern through a snowstorm. 1315. Not enough. It had never been enough. Word of the tax levy had arrived 2 nights before, with a parchment sealed in black wax, and the steward's angular hand declaring that by the first day of harvest waning, each household must render a double tithe in grain, gold, or bodies. Bracken Vale had already sold its cattle, its good iron, its pride. There isn't much left to sell, Elira's father had said, his tone so carefully mild it made Elira's throat burn. His eyes had not met hers. She suspected he had practiced that look at the door latch, the fire, the church wall, anywhere but on the daughter who had become a problem he could not fix. She dressed without noise, pulling her woolen gown over the plain linen shift that had once been part of her bridal chest, and now felt like a costume for a role she had been written out of. In the hearth, last night's embers exhaled a reluctant glow. When she stirred them, the ash rose like an apology. Her mother glanced up and then away, as if looking fully at Elira might tempt mercy to make a scene. "Boil water," she said. "If we're lucky, the collector will want tea." If we're lucky. The words fractured in the air like thin ice underfoot. Outside, the village moved in the careful rhythm of people pretending nothing was different. A bucket squealed on its rope at the well. A boy chased a dun-colored chicken, with the solemnity of a priest. Elira stepped into the yard, and lifted her face to the pale sky. She thought of the women who would not speak to her straight on, of the way conversation stopped when she entered, and judiciously resumed after she left, trimmed of anything sharp that might cut the skin of a barren woman. Barren. The word was a brand that did not scar visible flesh, but still stung when touched, a door people used to shut you outside the room where futures were counted. She had been married at 19 to Jareth Reed, a cooper whose shoulders were a promise, and whose laugh had sounded like a cure. For 5 winters they had tried to coax life into being, counting days, trying remedies, swallowing roots and hope and humiliation. In the spring of the 6th year, Jareth's mother had placed a bowl of riverstones on the table and said, "If there were a child, this bowl would be heavier," and Elira had understood without anyone saying the words. By summer, they'd sent her back to her father, with a small trunk of her clothes, and a loaf of barley bread that went stale before she reached the lane. It was not Jareth's cruelty that broke her, it was the politeness of it all, the way sorrow was folded and pinned like a shirt, and put away, as if that meant it would not be missed. "Oats," her father said now, standing in the doorway with his cap in his hands. It was not a question. Elira turned the small cloth sack out into a bowl. 3 handfuls and a dusting left. She set water to boil and ground the last fennel seeds to sweeten the thinness. Her mother's eyes slid toward the lane. They said before noon. A carriage arrived when the sun was still caught in the trees, lacquer black, wheels, hardly murmuring against the hard earth. It looked less like something built than something decided. 2 horses, black as river stones in rain, stamped vapor into the cold. The driver wore the livery of the Northern Court, deep blue edged with silver thread, a sigil Elira had seen only on proclamations nailed above the well, the shape of a crown pierced by a crescent, the mark of the one whispered as Darius the Eternal, the vampire king of Erindrel. The man who stepped down was not the driver but the collector. He took up the doorway with a measured stillness, a figure carved from winter. "Caldus," he said, as if introducing the air to itself. He did not remove his gloves. Elira felt the temperature of the room lean away from him. It wasn't magic that made it so, not the theatrical kind folks told by candlelight, it was attention. His went through you rather than upon you, as if he were reading the palimpsest under your surface. He glanced once at the pot on the hearth. Tea would be welcome. The politeness should have been a courtesy, and instead sounded like final punctuation. Her mother poured into the 1 cup with no chip, and nudged it across the table. We have had poor harvest," she began. "The barley came thin. The frost." Caldus unrolled parchment, its edges crisp enough to slice skin. The tithe is known. 2 measures, coin or service. His voice had the dispassion of an abacus. He looked at Elira's father. You filed notice last night. Her father's hand found the back of a chair. We offer. My elder daughter. The words came clean, no tremor, as if he had sanded them in his mouth, until they ran without catching. Elira's mother stared hard at the cup as if it had started to sing. Elira did not flinch. She had practiced not flinching the way some women practice needlework. She stood with her hands folded, the pose of a woman already removed from her own life, in everything but geography. Caldus looked at her, and then past her, and then, to Elira's surprise, back to her again. The second look was not an inventory of youth or flesh. It was as if he listened for something and found it. Name, he said. Elira Northwood. Age. 26. Marital status. Elira's throat felt full of salt. Annulled, no children. Caldus dipped his quill. Record states failure to conceive after 5 years of attempt. Confirm. Her father's breath hitched. Elira heard it like a door closing. Confirmed, she said. Caldus's eyes, grey, not the flattering sort, measured her again. Any illnesses? None. Skills? Reading, she said. Figures, bread. She had almost said stories, but stories were a currency only children used. Caldus's mouth did not move, and yet something in the room conceded a line had been drawn. He took a leather purse from inside his coat and set it on the table. The clink that followed was reticent, as if even coins were embarrassed by what they were paying for. Elira's mother's breath made a small sound, the kind a woman makes when a baby turns within her. The irony skimmed hot across Elira's skin, that her mother could make that sound for silver, and not for the cousin's child who had climbed her lap a week ago. Caldus turned to Elira. You will dress for travel? Elira nodded. She moved through the single room of the cottage, with the care of a ghost, who doesn't wish to startle the living. In her chest, something steady and unexpected uncoiled. Not hope, not defiance, but the clarity of crossing. There are moments, she thought, when a life chooses you, and not the other way around, and all you can do is decide whether you will go willingly enough to keep your dignity intact. She wrapped her shawl, lifted her small trunk, and when her mother reached to touch her cheek, at last, too late, Elira leaned forward to meet it as a courtesy to the past. The village watched without watching as she crossed the yard. The cooper's wife drew her child inside by the collar. The blacksmith's apprentice stood very straight and stared at the crooked thatch as if memorizing it for a test. The only one who met Elira's gaze was old Maud, who had birthed half the town and buried the other half. Maud's eyes were not kind and not unkind. They were honest. She lifted 2 fingers, a benediction made of bone and nerve. Elira lifted 2 fingers back. Inside the carriage, the air smelled faintly of iron and lavender, the perfume of a court that liked its blood tidy, and its sins embroidered. Caldus settled opposite her, and shut the door. The dark pressed in and then adjusted. The carriage moved like a decision you could not stop. Bracken Vale fell behind, roofs and rock and the tilt of the well. Then the fields, their stubble silvered with frost, then the tree line, thick as the back of a god. The blackwood received them in the way old forests receive everything, without surprise. Elira watched the world in slices, a fox looking up with an expression that could have been curiosity or dismissal, a silver ribbon of stream the color of a forgotten ring, a shrine of antlers where someone had tied bits of red cloth that lifted and lowered like small breath. The road climbed, wind found any seam in the carriage. Elira pulled her shawl higher, and thought of Jareth's hands learning her like a new tune, and of the silence that followed, when the song did not call a second voice. She did not resent him, not now. She resented the arithmetic that made her a subtractive force in every room. You are not afraid, Caldus said at last, as if reciting a fact that interested him because of its shape. Elira considered. I am not unused to being taken somewhere I didn't choose to go, she said. Fear is expensive, if you must carry it every day. A pause. You read, he said, not a question. Yes. The Northern Court keeps ledgers, another not quite statement. I can keep them, she replied, though she knew ledger-keeping was often male work, performed in rooms women scrubbed. And I can bake bread, badly if the flour is bad. Well, if the flour is good. Caldus looked out the carriage window. Flour is seldom the only ingredient that decides a loaf. They rode in companionable silence after that, if such a thing could exist between a woman being sold and the man tasked with delivering her. The road narrowed and then unfurled onto a ridge. Nightstone Castle rose ahead, not built on the mountain so much as convincing the mountain to agree to its existence. Black towers shouldered the sky. Crows circled like the punctuation of a sentence no one wished to read out loud. Within those walls, a man who had gone by a dozen names across a dozen reigns stood in an upper chamber and watched the road with the patience of geology. Darius of Arindral, called the Eternal by those who mistook longevity for ease, had not slept since the first cold snap. Sleep for his kind was not rest. It was a ledger too, balancing blood and hunger against restraint and rule. He did not keep his ledger on paper. He kept it in what remained of his conscience. He sensed Caldus on the ridge before he saw the carriage, the way a wolf senses the weather, with nose and bone and memory. And then, unexpected, bright as flint struck in a dark room, he sensed the girl. Not the heat of mortal fear, not the filament-thin flicker of a debutante teaching her pulse to perform, but a steadiness he had not felt in years. It arrived like a note he recognized from a song he had loved, before lovers had names. He closed his eyes, and let the sensation locate itself in him. Courage without bravado, sadness without plea. A mind that did not borrow its edges from men's opinions. He had asked Caldus for a service tithe on Bracken Vale, because Bracken Vale was a hinge village. Too near the forest for comfort, too far from the capital to be smug. Its loyalties malleable in the hands of rumour. He had anticipated a farmhand or a cobbler's son he could place in the East Watch, under a captain who would teach him when to look away and when to draw steel. He had not expected the gift of a woman no man could use as leverage against him. He had not expected a quiet signal in his blood that said, "Attend." Darius rested his palms on the cold stone sill and watched the carriage become a small, disciplined problem against the threshold of his world. He had learned that the court was at its most dangerous when it was bored. A bored court invented wars out of etiquette. For months the lower houses had muttered about heirs and alliances, reminding him with brittle teeth that an immortal king still needed mortal succession to grease the gears of bureaucracy. They wanted him to breed a treaty. They wanted a woman they could bargain through. He could oblige them with a marriage that would yoke 3 provinces and a harvest fleet. He could do what he had done before. Make a chess move that looked like love. But the cost of those moves had accrued like rust. The last queen had been clever and kind, and exhausted by a year. She had wanted children with a ferocity that made her cruel to herself. His body could imitate life in 1,000 ways, but there were old magics he would not traffic with to make an heir from what did not lend itself to seed. He had watched her disintegrate into prayer. He had buried her with the only ceremony he trusted, truth. No more bargains made with wombs, he had decided, reading the names of ancient kings in the mirror room, where his face should be and was not. No more treaties that required women to be the parchment. If I must have a companion at all, let it be someone no one can turn into a hostage. Let it be someone I cannot be tempted to turn into a legend. Let it be a mind. He turned from the window, and crossed to the great table where the Book of Oaths lay with its ancient spine protesting the hours. The pages were crowded with promises cooked over too high a fire. Some had burned holes in the vellum. He traced one name with his fingertip, a general who had sworn fealty twice, and meant each time for different reasons. "You taught me," he said softly into the empty air, "that truth requires witnesses." He closed the book and waited for Caldus's tread to stitch the distance between road and keep. The courtyard swallowed the carriage with the quiet appetite of places that have seen everything already. Elira stepped down into air that smelled of iron and rain about to happen. The castle stones rose around her like the ribs of a giant creature that had died standing. She lifted her chin the smallest degree. A servant with a ledger appeared as if conjured. Names were required. Origins. The small humiliations of being made official. Caldus's hand indicated a door toward the servants' underhalls, but his gaze, unreadable, tireless, angled toward the keep's western stair. "His Majesty desires an audience," he said. Servants went still in the way birds still when a hawk's shadow passes. The undermistress of chambers clicked her tongue and began to whisper rules, the catechism of survival. Speak when spoken to, do not lift your eyes, do not ask questions as if you think answers are owed. Elira smoothed the front of her gown. The cloth was good, better than anything she had worn since her wedding day. She did not remember putting it on. Someone had dressed her hands while she thought about other things. As Caldus led her across a corridor where tapestries drank sound, Elira counted her breath, the way she counted loaves in an oven. In for courage. Out for dignity. In for whatever this day now required of her. Out for the girl in Bracken Vale, who would never again be foolish enough to mistake a cradle for safety. They reached a door taller than any tree she had stood beneath. It opened without anyone touching it. There are doors, Elira thought, that swing, because the room behind them recognizes the person on the threshold. He stood near the window where the light was the color of pewter. He did not look at her first. He looked at the sky, the way a man looks at an old friend he is not sure he can trust today. His profile was cut in clean, ruthless lines, the particular beauty that makes a person look like they are always listening to music other people can't hear. When he turned, the room altered, not because magic shoved furniture, but because attention changed density. Elira northward, Caldus said, and withdrew into a silence that had shape. Elira kept her gaze level with the embroidery border of his coat. She could feel him feeling her, the way one senses a storm long before it is visible. Pressure, a prickle, a scent, like metal. He came closer without apparent movement, as if the air volunteered him forward. "Look at me," he said, and his voice was not a command. It was a test. She lifted her eyes. He did not smirk at her audacity. He did not flinch at the honesty in her face. He simply met her attention with his. His irises were the color of old gold, cleaned with winter. The first thought that rose in her was ridiculous, and therefore probably true. He looks like a man who has survived his appetites. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked, "and why you were not sent to the underhalls with the others from the villages that tithed?" "Because I can be useful," she said, and waited for him to tell her that usefulness meant lying on silk and forgetting her name. His mouth, beautiful in a way that would have benefited a crueler man, tilted, not quite a smile and not quite grief. "Yes," he said. "But not for reasons the court expects." He gestured to a table where a square of bread sat on a wooden trencher, still warm enough to fog the glass nearby. The simplicity of it hit her harder than any jeweled plate would have. He broke the bread and offered her the larger half. Her fingers closed around heat. Bread, she thought, is a country the hungry can still share. She took a bite and waited. He did not eat until she had swallowed. When he did, his eyes closed, brief, as if memory had come humming like a bee to a flower, and he had decided not to be afraid of it. "Politics feeds on women," he said quietly, "on their names, their futures, their bodies, their bargains. I have decided not to feed my reign that way. I asked this season for service, not sons." His gaze did not waver. "You were offered as a payment, because men believed you could not buy anyone's future. That is why I accepted you." A long, low anger uncurled in her, the good kind, the kind that heats the hands rather than burning the tongue. "For another reason," she said, not a question. "For another reason," he agreed, "because no one can use your body to bend your mind. Because I require a witness who cannot be turned into a ledger of heirs." He inclined his head toward a shadowed archway. "There is a room here that tells the truth about the people who stand within it. I cannot use it as other men do." A thread of dry humor laced the words. "It refuses to acknowledge me. But it will show you what clings to those who lie, and what light remains on those who tell the truth. I need a keeper for that mirror. I need a reader of men." Elira's heart beat once as if it had been held under water, and then lifted into air. "You want me to watch," she said. "I want you to witness," he said, "and to write." The Book of Oaths bites when it tastes a falsehood. It hums when it is fed the clean grain of truth. I need a hand the court will underestimate, because it cannot turn you into a treaty. He paused, and for the first time since she had entered the room, something like hesitation crossed his face, softening the handsome ruthlessness into an ache that might once have had a name. "And," he added, quieter, because when Kuldus said your name on the road, I heard my hunger go quiet. She understood him. It startled her to know it so quickly and so thoroughly. Hunger was not only for blood or power or sons. Hunger could be for a room where your soul could stand without being bartered. She thought of the cottage where her mother had counted coins that were not yet real, of Jareth's mother's bowl of riverstones, of old Maud's two-finger blessing. She thought of doors. I'll need ink, she said at last, and a hotter hearth for the bread. Something like relief, no, something like interest, kindled behind his eyes. Kuldus will see to both, he said. He stepped aside, making a path not only with his body, but with his attention. Come, let the mirror learn your name. Elira followed, the rhythm of her footsteps aligning to the long, patient pulse of the keep. Behind her, the door swung inward, as if the room had decided to hold them a little longer. Ahead, the corridor opened into dimness that felt less like dark, and more like truth being careful with its light. As they walked, October leaned its cool cheek against the stone, and the day that had started with a sail became, slowly, undeniably, the beginning of a different kind of belonging. The sun had rolled westward by the time Kuldus led Elira through the fortress corridors, and though daylight still touched the outer ramparts, within the keep it was always twilight. Torches guttered in bronze sconces. The stone itself seemed to breathe, warm where fire touched it, cold where shadow held sway. Elira moved as if into the ribcage of something vast, half living, half remembered. At her side, Kuldus said nothing. The scrape of his boots on flagstone was the only rhythm between them. She matched his steps, counting to distract herself, until they stopped before an arched doorway carved with sigils she did not recognize. They looked like letters from an alphabet that had chosen silence centuries ago. This is the Mirror Hall, Kuldus intoned. His grey eyes narrowed slightly, assessing her as one might assess a blade before putting it in the hand of an untried soldier. His Majesty will receive you here. The door opened not by touch, but by consent. The hall was not large, no throne, no dais, no banners proclaiming lineage. Instead, its walls were panelled with tall mirrors that stretched from floor to vaulted ceiling. Each was rimmed in iron and silver, their surfaces gleaming with a depth that unsettled the eye. At first glance, Elira thought she saw herself multiplied into infinity. Then she realized not all of the reflections were faithful. Some shifted, rippling as if submerged. Some faces wore faint stains that clung to shoulders or eyes, like shadows that refused to be washed away. And in one corner pane, her reflection looked back with steady eyes, but the corners of its mouth trembled as though it knew something she did not. She forced herself to keep her chin lifted. She would not flinch. Then he came. Darius entered through a side arch with no announcement. He did not need one. The air thickened. Torches bent their flames as if bowing. The mirrors shivered with faint static, refusing to hold him. Elira's heart surged once against her ribs, painful, and then steadied. She had imagined monsters with dripping jaws, imagined kings with jeweled arrogance, imagined cold gods who looked through you. But this was something else. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black and silver, that did not catch the light so much as teach it obedience. His face was cut in such merciless planes, it should have looked cruel, yet something in the way his mouth tilted, the barest suggestion of humor long starved but not extinguished, softened the edges. His hair was midnight, his skin pale as old marble, but his eyes, golden, fierce, endless, those were what unmanned her composure. They burned, but not with hunger. With recognition. Elira Northwood, he said. Her name in his voice was a chord plucked on strings she did not know she carried inside her. She bowed, careful, measured. Your Majesty. The silence stretched. When she risked raising her gaze, she saw him studying her not as men study a woman's form, but as one reads a manuscript. For meaning? For flaws? For truth hidden under ink. He moved closer. She realized with a jolt that he made no sound when he walked. You understand why you are here. His voice was velvet threaded with iron. Because I am payment, she said. Honesty was safer than a lie in this room where lies left stains. He tilted his head. Yes, that is the reason given. "But it is not the reason you were brought to me." Her pulse hammered, but her voice did not falter. "Then tell me the true reason." He stopped a pace away, his presence pressing against her skin like a tide. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, softly, "Because no one can use you as they use others. You cannot be turned into a treaty. You cannot be bartered for heirs. You have been stripped of the currency men love to hoard, fertility, and so you are free of its chains. That is why I chose you." Elira inhaled sharply. The words should have felt cruel. Instead, they felt like a key turning in a lock she had carried too long. He was not pitying her, he was naming her value in a world that had spent years naming only her lack. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "For another reason." His golden eyes flared with something unreadable. Hunger, yes, but not for her body, for her answer, for her witness. "For another reason," he echoed. His gaze flicked toward the mirrors. "Do you see?" Elira turned. In the glass she saw her own form, steady. Her face was pale but her spine straight. And behind her the vampire king was not reflected at all, only the outline of absence where he should be. The sight stole her breath. "You vanish," she said. "I have vanished for centuries," he replied, voice taut. "These mirrors do not lie, they show the stain of deceit, the weight of promises kept or broken. They are meant to keep kings honest. But they will not hold me. My kind is beyond their judgment, or beneath it. I do not know which." His tone softened. "That is why I need you. You can see what I cannot. You can write what the Book of Oaths demands. You are the one they underestimated, and therefore, the only one I can trust." Her mouth went dry. "Why me?" "Because when I felt you coming, the hunger that governs me fell silent." His gaze bore into hers. "Because I need someone who does not worship or fear. Because you carry absence like a crown and make it look like dignity." Elira's heart stumbled. All her life she had been told she was empty, broken, barren. And now, this king, this immortal, looked at her absence and saw worth. Silence stretched. Then he stepped back, breaking the tether between them, though she felt its echo still thrumming in her bones. "Will you serve as witness?" Her throat tightened. "Yes." He gestured to a servant in the shadows. A book the size of a tomb was carried forward, bound in dark leather scarred with centuries. Its pages whispered with a weight of voices long silenced. "This is the Book of Oaths," he said. "It devours lies, it preserves truth. You will write in it. Not their words, yours. You will be my scribe, my mirror, my witness." Elira reached for the quill. Her fingers trembled. The mirror behind her showed her reflection steadying, as if her own image had more faith in her than she did. She dipped into ink. She wrote her name. And the page hummed beneath her touch, as though the book itself approved. Darius exhaled, a sound so quiet it might have been mistaken for relief. For centuries he had ruled alone, watched allies become traitors, watched treaties dissolve like ash in water. He had kept his reign by fear and silence. But now, in this woman, this barren, broken woman, he felt something ignite he had long thought dead. The possibility of being seen without being used. He stepped closer, just enough for his voice to reach only her. "You will learn quickly that this castle feeds on secrets. Keep them, write them, but do not let them eat you." His golden gaze softened. "And remember, Elira Northwood." Her breath caught. "You are not chosen because you are barren. You were chosen because you cannot be broken into someone else's purpose." Her lips parted. No words came. Only the sensation of the world shifting, of a door she had not known existed opening. Outside, the October sky darkened, and the first stars blinked awake above Nightstone's towers. Within the mirror hall, a woman who had been sold as failure, and a king cursed never to be reflected, stood facing one another, not yet lovers, not yet allies, but bound already by a recognition older than either had words for. And somewhere in the marrow of Nightstone Castle, something ancient stirred, tasting the truth that had just been written, and whispered, "This will change everything." The first frost of winter silvered the battlements, and the halls smelled faintly of burning cedar. It had been nearly a month since Elira first stepped into the mirror hall, and though her duties had begun as scribe, they had widened into something stranger. something more intimate. By day she walked the corridors with quill and parchment, recording the oaths and decrees spoken within the castle. By night she was summoned to the West Wing, where the king kept chambers he never opened to the court. At first she thought herself being led into danger, but those rooms were not dens of debauchery. They were sanctuaries, libraries, private studies, balconies that overlooked the river, winding black beneath the stars. It was there, beneath candlelight, that she discovered the secret habits of a man the world feared as monster. Darius read aloud. Sometimes in forgotten tongues, sometimes in Erendral's own, but always with the cadence of someone who had lived the words, rather than merely learned them. He debated her, challenged her when her writing was timid, corrected her not as a king scolding a servant, but as a teacher sharpening steel. And sometimes, when silence fell between them, his gaze lingered on her longer than it should. Elira tried not to wonder what that gaze meant. Tried not to think of the warmth in her chest when it happened. Tried not to imagine that perhaps she was something more than a pen in his hand. But late at night when she returned to her narrow chamber, she would lie awake with ink-stained fingers pressed to her lips, as if trying to silence questions her heart had already answered. One evening as November's wind howled through the ramparts, she entered his chamber to find the curtains drawn tight, every candle extinguished save one. He stood at the window, rigid, his hands braced against the frame as though holding himself there by will alone. "Your Majesty," she asked softly. "Darius," he said without turning, "if we are to speak the truth, call me by my name." She hesitated. "Darius." The syllables trembled between them. At last he turned. His golden eyes burned brighter than the candle, but his face was etched with something she had never seen before. Anguish. "You wonder why I chose you," he said. "You think it is because you cannot be used as others can. That is part of it, but the truth is darker. You deserve to hear it." He crossed the room, so close the heat of him brushed her skin. His hand lifted as if to touch her cheek, but halted, clenched into a fist instead. "I am cursed, Elira. By night I walk as you see me. By day—" His voice faltered, and for the first time she saw fear in him. "By day I am not a king. I am the thing they whisper about in fireside tales. The beast of Nightstone. Horned, twisted, hungering. If you had arrived 1 hour earlier, you would have met that creature instead of me." Her breath caught. The stories of villages raided, of shadows in the forest, of beasts devouring livestock, they were not myths. "And the reason you chose me," she whispered. "Because I cannot risk binding myself to a woman who might betray me for power. Because I needed someone no one else would fight to claim, someone forgotten, overlooked. Someone whose worth was not chained to womb or dowry or bloodline. That is why you were brought here." His jaw tightened. "But what I did not expect was you." Her chest ached. "Me? You stand before mirrors that refuse to hold me, and they hold you steady. You write words no one else dared preserve, and the book itself answers you. And when I told you the truth of my curse, you did not recoil. You asked me why. You looked at me and saw not horror, but a man still capable of reason. That is why, Elira, that is why I chose you. For another reason entirely, because you see me." The silence between them pulsed. She felt the truth of it, deep as marrow. Her hands trembled, but she lifted one, slowly, and laid it against his chest. His heart thundered beneath her palm, fierce and alive. He flinched, as if the touch burned, yet did not pull away. "You are not the beast they fear," she said, voice unsteady. "You are the man who fought to keep something alive in himself when the curse tried to take it. You are the king who looks at me and does not see absence. You are Lo's." Her throat closed. She forced the words through anyway. "You are the first who has ever looked at me and seen more than what I cannot give." His breath left him like a shudder. His hand, at last, cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed her skin as though memorizing texture, as though he might lose her if he did not. Elira, her name was a confession. "If I kiss you now, it will not be as king to servant, it will be as a man who has nothing left to give but himself." Her lips parted. "Then give me that." He kissed her. The world fell away. The cold stone, the howling wind, the curse waiting for dawn, all dissolved into the heat of his mouth on hers, the press of his hand at her nape, the trembling ache in her body that was not fear, but recognition. She had thought herself barren, but in that kiss something bloomed, wild, unstoppable, alive. When they parted, she was breathless, her forehead pressed to his. "So this," she whispered, "this is the reason." "No." His voice was rough, raw. "This is what follows the reason. The reason is simpler. I chose you because you cannot be broken into what they wanted. And now," he swallowed hard, "now I cannot imagine being whole without you." But fate does not leave such vows unanswered. The very next night, during a feast to honor the kingdom's winter harvest, the castle was attacked. Masked men slipped through the banquet hall, blades drawn, aiming for the king. Darius fought them with inhuman grace, but the curse stirred, urging him toward bloodlust. Lyra, seated at the edge of the hall with her quills, saw it in his eyes, the flicker of the beast beneath the man. Without thought, she leapt forward, seizing the Book of Oaths and slamming it onto the table between Darius and his assailant. The book flared with light, searing the would-be assassin where he stood. Darius froze, panting, his golden gaze snapping to her. In that moment, she anchored him, not the throne, not his soldiers, not even his curse, her. The hall stilled, the assassins fled, or were cut down. But in the aftermath, as the whispers spread and the courtiers watched in trembling awe, Darius crossed the room and pulled Lyra into his arms before all. "My witness," he said, voice carrying like thunder. "My chosen, not for heirs, not for treaties, for truth." And as he held her, she realized that the reason he had chosen her was not because she was barren, but because she was the one thing he had never had before, someone who could not be bought, bargained, or bent. Someone who could see the man behind both crown and curse. The Vampire King had chosen her not in spite of what she lacked, but because of what she was, free, unclaimed, and unbreakable. And in that moment, Lyra understood the truth of her own heart. She had not been sold, she had been found. And that, dear listener, is where the story of Lyra Northwood and Darius the Eternal comes to rest, at least for now. As the last echoes of Nightstone Castle fade, you might find yourself wondering, would you have stepped into that carriage, as Lyra did, if it meant losing everything you'd ever known but gaining the one thing you'd always longed for, to be truly seen? Would you have believed the whispered stories of a cursed king, or looked past them the way she did? And if someone had told you that the thing you thought made you unworthy, your lack, your defect, your failure, was the very thing that made you irreplaceable, would you have believed them? Do you think the Vampire King ever truly stopped being a beast? Or do you think Lyra simply learned to love every part of him? Was it the curse that changed him, or her presence? And which is more powerful? A curse strong enough to twist a king into a monster, or a heart strong enough to tell a story that saves him? These are the questions I leave with you. Because stories like this are not just about castles and kings, about bargains and curses. They're about what it means to be chosen, to be seen, to be loved. Not for what you can give, but for who you are. So as you sit with this tale, ask yourself, who in your life sees you the way Lyra was seen? Who have you looked at, past their armor, past their reputation, and found something human and worth saving? Drop your thoughts, your favorite moments, or even your own what-if endings for Lyra and Darius in the comments. Did this ending feel like the one you were hoping for? Or do you imagine another chapter waiting just beyond the castle gates? Either way, thank you for stepping into this story with me. Until next time, keep looking past the surface, keep telling your stories. Because sometimes, that's how curses break.